DNA wasn't discovered till the 1950s. So my mom was born in 1935 and she didn't go to college. So she didn't learn about DNA.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an Ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And welcome to episode 208. And thank you so much to all the people that have supported this podcast in 2024. I was looking at my Patreon account this morning and I just feel so lucky, so grateful, very blessed. This month, with Patreon donations, I was able to pay for all of my licensing fees, my software, my subscriptions. This was the month where I think I had probably 15 Patreons that were able to help me pay for everything in the technology world when it comes to my podcast. So thank you. Every little $3, $5 donation helps, and especially to my $10 devotees. You guys, I just appreciate it. So thank you so much to all my Patreon contributors. And today we are going to listen to an NPE story. And today I have a guest. Her name is Robin Schepper. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Lily.
How are you doing today?
I am great.
And I heard from, let's see here, was it a publisher a few months ago or maybe a year ago and said I had to hear your story. So does that mean you have a book out on your story?
I do have a book. I have a book. It's called Finding My Way. And the subtitle is a memoir about family identity and political ambition. And the book I started writing it 20 years ago. And it was really about the search for my biological father, but I never could end it because I never knew who he was until consumer DNA came along. So when I finally got the ending, I finished the book, and then my publisher, Girl Friday Productions, put that book together, and it's been out for about a year and a half.
Oh, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I will put the link for Finding My Way down below. And we would love to hear part of your story today. So how this podcast works is normally we start with who was in your family of origin. So your raising family as you knew it. And then we kind of go from there into how you found out you were an NPE. So I'd love to hear who was in your family of origin, a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah, so I have an unusual childhood. I've been listening to a lot of NPE stories that people are surprised because people that they thought were their fathers were not their biological fathers, but I never had one. So my mom was a stewardess for Pan Am, and for younger audiences, that was our global American airline that traveled around the world. My mother was based in San Francisco and traveled to the Philippines, to Japan, to Australia. And back in those days, stewardesses had to weigh in every week and be a certain weight. And if you were 3 pounds overweight, you were docked and worked at the ticket counter. And my mom spoke 3 languages, German, French, and English. And she found herself pregnant because she went in for a weigh-in and she was overweight. And she was trying to lose weight. And then she figured out that she was pregnant. So she decided to have me as a single mother. And in the 60s, that was really not done. She was not married. And I consider my mom the first feminist and the bravest woman I ever knew. So she was still in our apartment shared with other stewardesses. My first crib was a laundry basket with a sheepskin rug and blankets. And she tried that for about 6 months, but it was too hard. So she moved back to New York City, where my grandmother was, her mother, and my grandmother's sister, my Tanta Anna. And the three of them raised me in New York City. So that was my family of origin. And I never really thought it was any big deal about not having a father because I didn't know anything different. I lived in a very German neighborhood, so I didn't speak English until kindergarten. And it really wasn't until kindergarten when I was with lots of other kids talking about dads that I started asking the question, who's my dad? So it was not a conversation that my mother liked to talk about. She would just say, he worked in the airlines, he was married, we had an affair. I thought he'd leave his wife. He didn't. There you go. I don't want to talk about it anymore. So that was kind of my family of origin.
Okay. Okay. So are you a only child?
I am an only child. Yeah, my mother never had any other children. Keep going if you like. So I grew up in New York. And later on, when I was in kindergarten, my mom it was kind of funny. My mom was looking for a job because she had been laid off from the airlines. And we were visiting some family friends down in Miami, and ended up meeting this family from Sweden, this older couple and their grown son, who was similar age to my mom, and started talking. And his ex-wife needed a nanny in New York City for his son. And he said, I can suggest you to my ex-wife. And so my mother was very capable and really good with little children. So she ended up being the nanny. So when you talk about family of origin, my family of origin was kind of strange in the sense of I went to go live in this beautiful apartment on West End Avenue in New York City, rooming with the young boy who was a year older than me, the ex-wife, and then my mother lived in the maid's room. In a lot of New York City apartments, there are maid's room off the kitchen, so they're tiny. They can fit like a twin size bed and a tiny dresser, and and that's about it. So we lived there for about a year, and then my mother fell in love with the ex-husband, and then we had to leave because it got pretty awkward. So I had a father figure, but he traveled. He worked for the government, and I think he actually was a spy because he spoke 7 languages. But he traveled to the Soviet Union. He spoke Russian, Swedish, Norwegian, German, English, French, Spanish. I don't know if I have them all.
Oh,
But
gosh.
anyway, he just was all over the place. And I remember later in life, I asked him, were you a spy? And he said, Robin, you think spies are like James Bond, but spies are just about gathering information. And so I said, so does that mean you were a spy? And he didn't answer me. So, and he recently passed. He was with my mom for over 50 years, and he still would never tell me. So I asked
Fascinating.
I know, but yeah, but he was in all these places, and then he would leave. He would go somewhere like to Venezuela for 6 months, and then something would happen, or he'd be in Damascus, or in Bratislava, or all these places, and something would always happen. I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah. So I think he was a commercial spy, working for U.S. businesses.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so he was a father figure, and I called him dad because I didn't know any other dad, but I always was looking for my dad. And my mother always told me that my biological dad was this guy named Robert. And as I said before, she was in love with him. And when I went to college, I decided I really wanted to reach out to him because he supposedly lived in California. So I was going to college in Northern California, and he was from Southern California. So I wrote a letter and saying, I'm Trudy's daughter, and I just want to know a little bit more about you, would love to meet you. Never heard back from him, but heard back from his wife. And she said, her name was Beate, and she was Austrian. And she said, I'm sure you're a nice young lady, but he's not your father. Don't contact us. So I was really kind of upset. And then And then I also, just kind of gave it up until I got sick. I got epilepsy, a seizure disorder later on in life in my late 20s. And I was married to my first husband at the time, and we couldn't figure out why I was having seizures. So my first husband said, "Hey, we have to contact your biological father. We have to find out what's going on." So he knew a private detective from high school or college, I can't remember. And so we sent a registered letter. She found where he was easily. And I sent a letter and I said, "I don't want anything from you. We don't have to have a relationship, but I have this seizure disorder. And I'm just trying to find out if you have seizure disorders in the family or any other health issues that I should know about, because we wanted to have kids." And I heard nothing. And years went by, and my first marriage started falling apart, mainly because of my epilepsy. And I came home. I was traveling a little bit. I was living in Seattle at the time. And I had done a big project working in Denver for about 4 months. And I came back, and there was a letter with black kind of bordering. And I knew from my mom and my grandmother that relatives in Germany, when there was a death notice, you would get a blue airmail letter with black lettering. And so I opened it up, and it was that same woman, Beate, writing me and saying, "Hey, Robin, he just died, the person that you think was your father, but I'm not sure if he was your father, but if you want to come talk to me about him, feel free to come visit." So I was kind of shocked. And so I took a plane down from Seattle down to Southern California, and I knocked on her door, and she opened the door and she said, "Oh my God, you're so grown up." And I said, "Have you met me before?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, during the child support hearing, didn't your mother and your grandmother tell you that they sued for my husband to pay child support?" And I said, "No." And I don't know how old I was, but I probably was 2 or 3, or I don't know how old it was, because my mom and grandmother would not talk about these things. And so I talked with her, and she gave me pictures, but this is pre-consumer DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at the pictures, and I'm blonde with blue eyes, and he was blonde with blue eyes. And it was just hard to know, like, okay, maybe he could be my dad, but maybe not. And so we had a lovely conversation, and she kind of told me that he was prone to having affairs. He was a traveling salesman. So, it was a high likelihood he could be my dad, but she didn't know. And she had 2 other kids. So we kind of left it at that. But I just remember leaving, and I said, "I'm just not sure. I just don't think it's him." And I don't know why, but it was just something in my gut. Maybe looking at pictures and looking pictures of his kids, I'm like, I see no resemblance. So I just left, and I got married again, adopted 2 kids. And with my adopted kids, since they didn't know their biological parents, when consumer testing came out, Ancestry.com and 23andMe, my husband, myself, and the 2 kids, we all went on it. We all did it. But this is decades later, because I thought, okay, maybe I'll find something out. And so I just forgot about it. I just said, "Hey, I don't know my biological father, but I'm going to focus on my nuclear family and not worry about it because it really doesn't matter." I thought, I've moved on. And in 2019, we were on a vacation, and we were trekking to Mount Everest Base Camp. And I didn't have a lot of internet access, where I wasn't checking my emails all the time. So I got back home, and I had all these emails, but I had a message on one of the platforms and said, "Hey, the platform says we're first cousins, but I can't figure out how we're related, because I don't have my I can't figure out who in the family could be related to you." And so I sent her I just on the platform, I emailed her back, and I said, "Well," I was born in 1963. My mom was a stewardess living in California, and she got pregnant, and I don't know my biological dad. So maybe one of your male relatives." And 24 hours later, she emails back, and she says, "Oh my God, you're Uncle Jack's daughter." So I was just I couldn't believe it. Like after decades, I'm in my 50s and I find out who my biological father is. So that was shocking and
Yeah.
also gratifying. But it was not anybody that I suspected, and because I thought it'd be somebody from my mom's stewardess days. I mean, it was from her stewardess days, but not from the airplane world, from Pan Am. Uh, so it was. I had this immense feeling of relief, gratefulness that I finally knew before I died who he was, and also sadness because he had just died 1 year before. So I never got to meet him.
Oh, oh, how did you feel in those first few days after getting that message that you were Uncle Jack's daughter?
I was so surprised, but so relieved. And as I said, extraordinarily grateful because my first cousin, Susan,
Mm.
she was so kind. I tear up when I think about it. She was so open and kind because when you listen to these MPE stories, not everybody is open and kind when they find out that they're related to somebody else. But she wanted to do a video call so that we could see each other. She sent me pictures of him, and I sent her pictures of me and my mother. And and then she said, we have to get together. So I just felt automatically welcomed into this new family that I didn't know. But then when I saw the pictures, it was uncanny. And then when I read the obituary of who he was, I was like, oh my God, that is my dad. Because we share so many similarities of kind of who we are. And then the pictures, I mean, there were pictures of him graduating from high school. And if you look at them side by side of me when I'm similar age, we look like we're brother and sister.
Oh, wow.
There's also pictures. He was a big sailor. That's how I got pregnant. My mom got pregnant on a sailboat. So, which we figured out later. But yeah, and so there's a picture. He was a photographer, and I love photography as well. And there's a great picture of him on a sailboat, and we have the exact same eyes and smile. And so I just felt welcomed, but also kind of validated because for so long I was just not allowed to talk about it. My mother would always say, why do you want to know? And what is a big deal? You know, daddy loves you so much, you know, you're my stepfather. And I
Yeah.
said, I know he does. And I love him too, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to know who my biological father is. Like we all have this yearning to know who they are. It's just, I think, a human impulse of where we come from. And I'm so unlike my mother that I was just like, why am I how I am? I don't understand.
Mm.
Um, and so I felt like the puzzle pieces came together and I just felt this enormous sense of relief. And then also, I guess surprise is the word in the sense of I thought like, oh, I don't really care about this anymore because I'm focusing on my family. But I didn't realize that it was still a hole. I just had pushed it down and just thought I'm never going to find out. So why dwell on it and just move on? And and then once I found out, just all these emotions, happy, sad, crying that I thought that, oh my God, if I had found out 1 year earlier, I could have met him.
Mm. Did you have a conversation with your mom about this after you found out Jack was your birth father?
Yes, I did. And it was not easy. So I was never allowed to talk about this. And I asked my mom a few years before to also go on the platform. And so we were on a trip together. My stepdad was not doing well, and he had promised my mom to go back to Sweden and Norway for a trip to see the midnight sun and go to the fjords. And so he asked me to go with my mom. So we're on this trip. And I thought, okay, I'm going to bring it up, but I am not going to bring it up at the beginning of the trip because I didn't know how she would react. Because again, it was so like I was just not allowed to talk about it. It was just like not. And so much so that she has told the neighbors and everybody in her life that my stepfather is my biological father.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not allowed to say that he's my stepfather or that I have a stepbrother or all that kind of stuff. So we're on this trip, and I actually had found relatives on my mother's side. My mother's father had emigrated from Austria to the United States when he was 16. I think about my kids when they were 16, and I think, do you know that my grandfather and my grandmother both came on the boat by themselves when they were 16 to the United States? I mean, can you imagine just like the guts that you have to have, like only 16 years old? But he came to the United States, and I was always told, and the story I heard, that he was one of five, and he was on the younger side of the brothers, so he wasn't going to inherit the farm in Austria. So he came to the United States to, to have a better life, because without land in a rural economy, there wasn't many options for him. So I found out through DNA that he had an older sister, and she had immigrated to the United States, and actually she had sponsored him. So I tell my mother. So I thought, well, if I tell my mother first about her family, maybe she'll be more open to learning about my biological dad. So she doesn't really, I think it's hard for us to understand now. I don't know how old you are, but DNA wasn't discovered till the 1950s. So my mom was born in 1935, and she didn't go to college. So she didn't learn about DNA. So when I'm talking to her about DNA strands and that we're related to other people, she's like looking at me like, how does this work? I don't understand. Like, you spit into a vial and you find this out? It was a huge, just the concept of finding relatives through spitting in a vial was just beyond her belief system. So I brought my laptop and I showed her the other relatives that were the kids of her father's sister that she really didn't know about, which I found weird as well. But then there was names on it in there. She's like, oh, I remember that name. Oh yeah, I had a cousin. So I think it was just not I guess my grandfather was not close to his sister. But so then she started to accept it. And then on the last day of the trip, ironically, my mother's favorite movie is Mamma Mia. And if you remember, the movie is about a young girl who's getting married, and she doesn't know who her dad is, and invites three guys who could conceivably be the dad. And Meryl Streep plays the mom. And there's a scene at the very end where the three fathers are there and they all want to walk her down the aisle. And Meryl Streep is kind of confused. And the daughter says, Mom, I don't care who my dad is. I love you. And so I mimicked that line to my mom. And I said, well, Mom, I know we found out about your family, but I found out who my biological dad is. And she's like, yeah, of course, we know who it is. I've told you. And I said, no, it's not that person. And she's like, what? And I said, Mom, I don't care who the dad is. I love you. So it doesn't really matter. She said, well, who is it? And so I tell her this Uncle Jack, and she's like, I don't know a Jack. I never knew a Jack. What are you talking about? And so she's kind of defensive at first. But then I start telling the story about who he is in California, that he was a lawyer and then started a successful business and was a big sailor. And she teases me and she says, you and your research, always something. And so she's not mad, but she's not kind of welcoming. So we go to sleep, and the next morning we're leaving to go to the airport. And she wakes up and she said, so did Jack have a boat? And I said, yeah, he was a big sailor, he had a sailboat. And she said, well, I do remember a guy when I lived in Sausalito that would call me and say, meet me at the dock. And then, he was teaching me to sail and I'd meet at the dock, and, but it was just sailing. I said, Mom, I'm here. So I think there was more than sailing. So she didn't really remember him. She kind of remembered him, but it was more like a fling, not a relationship. So she wasn't in love with him or anything like that. So she read the obituary, and when we were on the plane heading back to the United States, I could tell she was upset. So I held her hand and And at some point she looked at me and she goes, I read the obituary a couple of times and he seems like he was a lovely man. I wish I had known because I wish he could have helped us. That would have made life much easier for you and me. And so I just got sad for her, because she definitely, being a single mom in the 60s and 70s, was not easy. So anyway, I told her, but so now we kind of, our relationship is so much better between my mom and I because there's not this question mark. And every now and then I mention Jack, but I don't bring it up a ton to her. And I actually told her not to read my book because I thought that would kind of upset her. She finally acknowledged that it could be Jack. Yeah, I was in my 50s when I found out. So it's a long NPE story.
Mm. And did Jack marry? Did he have children?
Oddly enough, he never had biological children. So,
so he never learned about you.
He never learned about me, and he never. So I don't have any siblings or half siblings. So he was married 3 times, but never had any kids.
So this cousin through Ancestry is really your lifeline to learning information.
Yeah. So she's a gem, and she organized a trip for her and her daughter. Her daughter was the one who got her on the platform. Her daughter's really into genealogy for both sides of our family. Her daughter, Joy. And so Jack was from San Diego, originally from the Midwest, but lived in San Diego. And we went out to San Diego to meet, and it was amazing. And Jack and his wife, that she died before him, his wife Marty, they were very close to this other couple, Angela and Gus. And Angela still lived in San Diego and had some of Jack's things and had bought his house in Mexico, his second home, and she was very gracious of meeting up with us as well. So between Angela and Susan, they organized for me to go to the yacht club where he had a sailboat, and a couple of years he was the commodore of the yacht club, and so met some of his friends, and it was delightful. And it was strange. I was sitting there, there were 2 friends at the yacht club, and they kept staring at me. And I ordered a Arnold Palmer drink, the iced tea and lemonade. Like, oh my God, that was Jack's favorite drink.
Oh.
And then they're looking at me and they're staring at me. And I said, what, do I have food on my face? They're like, oh my God, you just look like him so much. Your jawline is the same. It's so amazing. And they were so lovely. They were just like, he would have been so happy to know that you existed. They were just so sad that he didn't get to know that I was alive. But they were lovely. And yeah, and then later we ordered dessert, and I ordered vanilla ice cream, and they said, oh my God, that's what Jack always ordered.
Oh.
And then I found out from Susan, from her family, that none of us drink coffee.
Wow.
So it was such this incredible sense of belonging and just weirdness. I'm like, how does that work? That, like, I liked ice cream and Arnold Palmer's, and that I don't drink coffee, just like my cousins.
Wow.
So it's so strange. And then they had just sold his beautiful house in the San Diego hills, and Susan is a force. And she said, I want you to see Jack's house. And her daughter was like, well, someone else has bought it. And she's like, let's just drive up there and see it from the outside. And I said, okay. So we drove up, and then Susan's like, I'm going to go knock on the door. And I was like, no, don't do that. That's embarrassing. She said, no. I want you to see the house. And I'm like, okay. So she's amazing, full of courage and vigor. And so she knocked on the door, and she told them the story that Jack had lived there, and that they just found me, and that I never knew Jack, but could I see the house? They literally had just moved in, and they're like, of course, come on in. Oh. So went through every room, and they're going to renovate some of it. Like, I think they were going to do a new kitchen and things, but nothing had changed yet. So I didn't necessarily feel his presence, but it was nice just to see his place and know that where he had lived. So that was lovely. So it was a great way to kind of bring that story to, I don't want to say a closure, but that I finally know who he is, and now I have this other family.
So I know you've written this book, so I'm assuming that has been incredibly helpful as well. What has been helpful for you in this whole process, in this journey of finding out about Jack and finding out your true roots?
Well, I would say a couple things is my childhood was very unusual, so I hadn't even told stories about my grandmother, which I can tell you as well. But writing for me as an only child, I started keeping a journal when I was really, really young. My mom always reminds me, and she sends me letters I sent from camp when I was in first grade. So writing was almost like my confidant. I would keep a journal, or pretty much back in those days, being that young, I would say dear diary.
Mhm.
So writing the book was cathartic in the senses I could kind of work out all the pieces. And then I had an extraordinary editor. My first editor had multiple editors once I got a publisher, but my first editor, Shannon, who was amazing, she pushed me to not only you learn in writing classes. I've taken a bunch of creative writing classes of show me, don't tell me. But there were a couple parts of growing up with a dad without a dad that were just so empty, and there's just so much of my life that I was lonely. And she pushed me to talk about or write about my feelings and not just about the events. And so it really helped me. And even though I am going to write a second book about my grandmother, but even though I don't have the same discipline I had when I was writing and editing the book of, I used to try to do a half hour to an hour a day. I'm still writing in my journal for catharsis because you think that you've processed everything. And I'm sure you and others with MPE stories, a song comes on, or you see a picture, or you watch a movie, or something comes on, and just like the tears just start flooding.
Mhm.
And so I know the ending to the story now of who he is, but just realize it's just part of, I guess, part of your DNA in so many ways. Not
Mhm.
just of who you are, but just kind of it lives inside of you. So I just try to, instead of pushing it down, I try to feel it. And then I've tried to have really open conversations because both of my children are adopted and they don't know. Well, my older son knows who his biological mother is and kind of the concept of his biological father, but he's never met them. And then my younger son doesn't know anything. So I know what it feels like. And before I knew Jack, my older son, every now and then when he was little, like we were going in the car, just the weirdest times, he would say, Mom, you don't know your biological father, right? And I was like, Nope, just like me. I'm like, Yep, yeah, just like you. And he's like, Okay, I thought so. And so it actually not knowing my biological father, but also going through this process has created a bond with my adopted children because I know what it feels like to have just to have this question mark. And for people that know both their biological parents, they just can't imagine. I mean, it's hard for anybody to fathom. So I just try to share that with my kids so that they don't feel so alone.
And Robin, you said you're thinking about writing a second book about your grandmother. Can you speak on this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So my grandmother, I said before, she immigrated from Germany when she was 16, and she was a remarkable woman and she helped raise me. I would go to her house at her apartment in New York City after school, and she would lay cards. She liked to lay cards and tell my fortune. And then we'd go across the street and get jelly donuts. So I loved visiting her after school. And I was a latchkey kid. So it was fun to spend the time before my mom got home from work. But what was interesting was she had been trained as a nurse. And then later on, she wanted to, her husband died. So she was a widow. She started a massage business. And so I would visit, and she had beautiful young women that worked for her, and they all wore nurses' uniforms. And I thought nothing of it because my grandmother gave me massages all the time. When I was little, I said, I don't want to take a nap. And she would massage my feet, and then I'd be out in 5 minutes. Uh, but there was one day when she had this waiting room. It looked like a doctor's office. And a lot of New York City buildings on the bottom floor, you have doctor's offices. So hers was no different. And so there was one day, I think I was about 13, and the doorbell rings. She's like, oh, Robin, why don't you go in the kitchen? I have a new patient. She called them all patients. And I said, well, why can't I see the patient? No, go in the kitchen. And so I went in the kitchen, and so I could hear her talking to him, and she had told me he was a lawyer. And so I really wanted to see what he looked like because I didn't really know any lawyers. So he's walking down this aisle towards the treatment room, which my grandmother called it. And I crack open the door a little bit. So you could see one of my eyes, but so I see this guy in a suit with a briefcase and all, just looks all very professional. And he sees me and he locks eyes on me and he tells my grandmother, I want her. And then I see my grandmother like take him by the elbow, and I hear her say, you can't have her. And she had a very thick accent. You can't have her. And then going into the treatment room. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, grandma's business is not just massage. And so, because she didn't trust her girls. So once a week she would ask me, she had this like green zipped envelope that I would bring cash to the bank on the corner, and then bring the bank book back. This is, pre-electronics. So they would stamp the bank book of the deposit. And so she always had nice things, and she wasn't rich or anything, but she just had nice clothes, a couple mink coats. She would go to Europe on a long trip once a year. And so then she never told me, but I figured it out when I was a sophomore in college. She decided to go to Germany for 6 weeks. And she calls me and she says, Robin, I gave your name to the girls. If there's a problem, they're going to call you. And I said, okay. So one day I get a call from Josie, and she says, Lily, I can't remember her name. I'm just using your name. But, your grandmother has strict rules that no one can go to people's homes, that everybody has to come to the studio. It was called The Studio, was her place. And Lily, is trying to go to somebody's house. And I told her that she can't do that, and that your grandmother would be really upset. So I have to so she goes, I'm going to put her on the phone to you. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm 19 years old and I'm negotiating between two girls of like, what's their cut of essentially doing massage with other services. So I tell her, I said, I'm going to have to tell my grandmother, and she's probably going to fire you if you go to somebody's house. She wants to keep you safe. And that's why everybody has to come to the studio. And she's like, okay, Robin. And so so that was like my second clue. And then years later, when she was dying of cancer, I was in my 20s, and I got a call from the same Josie. Hey, can you come up to New York? I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. Your grandmother's not doing well, and she hasn't been depositing any of the money that we give her once a week into the bank. So we need you to come up to do the banking. It's like, okay. So, but it was a second bout of breast cancer, and it spread to her bones. So I had just seen her at Christmas. This was like early January or something. Yeah, it was January. And so I went up, and she was at this seedy hotel, not in her apartment, not at the studio. And I walk in, and this guy is looking at me, eyeing me up and down. And I say, I'm looking for Margaret Schepper. And so he says, so are you in the business? I look at him. I'm like, no, I'm her granddaughter. He's like, oh, I see the resemblance. Are you sure you're not in the business? And so he's almost propositioning me. And I'm like, just take me to my grandmother. Tell me what floor she's on. And so I go up there, and she's not doing well. And I'm on the bed with her, and I'm just trying to convince her to go back to the apartment. And I said, the girls told me that you haven't been depositing the check, the money to pay the rent and stuff. And so where's the money? And then behind the couch in her huge purse, there are probably 20 envelopes of cash. And I counted out, there's $5,000 of cash just sitting there. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to confront her now. My big deal is to get her out of here. So I packed her up, I get her, and she's not doing well, so it's slow. And then I have to pay for the hotel. And the guy is negotiating with me. And he's saying, well, your mother's been a good customer, but I've been really discreet. So you owe me $1,000. So I'm negotiating with him of his hourly rate, his nightly rate. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not what I thought I'd be doing when I'm 25 years old. So I negotiated and gave him some cash and got my grandmother in a cab and took her to an apartment. But that's when I realized that that's what the business was. So the title of my next book, I think, is going to be Accidental Madam. I don't think my grandmother set out to be a madam, but she was very German. And unlike Americans, she was just very matter of fact about bodies. So I can just imagine somebody asking her to massage a certain place on somebody's body, and she would probably say, okay. I don't think she would care because it was not a big deal. So I did a book tour last year. I went to about 15 different locations, and everywhere I went, everybody said, especially people that had read the book, you have to write more about your grandmother. So that's what I'm going to do.
That's fascinating. And I love that you're going to continue to write. And yes, your grandmother, the businesswoman, I love the name of it, Accidental Madam.
Yeah.
Oh, well, let me know when that one comes out as well, just because it's fascinating to hear. And Robin, thank you so much for coming on today. Tell me, if people wanted to contact you or find out more about you, where should they go to get more information?
Well, if they go to my website, robinfschepperauthor.com, and then I have a contact page on that. And so they can read more about me, order the book. It's also in audio and in digital form. And they can also send me an email and any questions that they have.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being willing to let people contact you. And thank you, Robin, for coming on today and sharing so much of your story today. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you. It's a pleasure.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.